Hello, my name is Alex and I am the host of How Grotesque podcast, and this is episode 3 of the series. Hopefully you'll like it and you won't find it repulsive. So, what is this podcast about? It's about rambling, raving, ranting and banter, freestyle fiction if nothing more. There is no continuation, no framework, not much of anything but a ravings of possible lunatic, to be frank. So if you want to engage few minutes with ramblings on multiple subjects, from garbage collection to piracy, this could be just the place for you, my dear listener. Still, there are moments of clarity and lucidity in all of this, so anything goes. And as such, there are stories that are forgotten in the mists of time regardless if they happened yesterday or some centuries ago. So if you are attracted to highbrow banter, I think you'll find this podcast very informative and perhaps even entertaining. This podcast is for mature audiences and listener discretion is advised. All that being said, now let us dive into the third episode of How Grotesque podcast. Today we are quasi-blessed with both poetry and prose. First we have one poem that will serve as an appetizer for the ravings that will follow up. This poem, on the verge of being very good, is simply named Brains. Thousand shades of brown splashing through the empty pipe, are dreams or nightmares going down? None too certain, fancy papers wipe. Brain in pains, trying to grasp orgasms, charging cross no man's land, can't stand the passion, oh so vast, of pure substance, of meaning so grand. Brain in pains, scattered remains, Walpurgis night or X-Mass come in? Could they care, those pinkish stains, perhaps, if only proper shape was there? Brain in pains, shapeless and still immovable completely, creativity slain, pushing up the daisies, burning the bill, demons mowed down, angels pulling the chain. And now, after this gem of written word, let's go back to the prose as a primary genre of this podcast. Today's story is called The Tinkin. The working hours had just ended and Obelisk saw his friend Asterisk in the distance. He was too far ahead to call him, and his shoes were not in the best condition to try to catch up with him. He went home alone. He was half happy, considering that after a long time he managed to arrange a meeting. A date, as the new and hopeful generations love to say. It has been a while since Obelisk went on a date, so he was a bit rusty but still satisfied that he appeared on the dating scene via social media. On the way to the apartment he stopped at the local grocery shop and bought something to eat. If under the term purchase can be considered writing on an ever-expanding slate. The cynical remarks of the seller that he owes a debt and that he is doing him a great favor, startled the half-trance in which he was, but in spite of that, the pink cloud on which he was sailing remained undaunted. As he prepared for the date, he noticed that the Carries was playing tango in his mouth, with 7 teeth already missing and all the rest in need for urgent repair. That the razor was long past its usefulness and that the aftershave smelled too aggressive and was obviously cheap. But he did not have the need to worry, even though all those facts had a corrosive effect on the half-trance he was in. Improvisation is a specialty of certain social classes, so even with Obelisk, the coping was at a high level. He knew how to make lunch with any of yesterday's leftovers, and to cook on the cheap tariff, after 11 p.m. He knew how to feed himself for a sum that would throw the people of Bangladesh into despair. It was already a little harder with the clothes, and health sort of succumbed to resourcefulness, unfortunately. The date as a date started with a bouquet of flowers. There was an old-fashioned trait in Obelisk's character that he wanted to let the woman know that was a man's man. Gender equality theories were questionable at best. Where he obtained those flowers is better not said. Samantha, his partner that night, was not hot. It's difficult to say if she was at least cute. Up and down on the same social ladder as Obelisk, He knew what to expect but still did not fail to insist on a restaurant unfamiliar to Obelisk. He nevertheless agreed and they went there. The date was good, without any drama but also without slips. She noticed that Obelisk was nervous. He just prayed that she would go to the toilet so that he could study the menu well, make a calculation, see if there was a trap hidden in it, a trap in which the poor ego of Obelisk would be catched. Unfortunately, Samantha did not go to the toilet at all. Are there any such women? Obelisk thought. Obviously there were. And there were those who drank at least 750 milliliters of wine per going out on a date, on a night with fried, on birthday celebrations. Our hero was not aware of that. The Obelisk being resourceful, it will cope somehow, he thought. He stated that he was on therapy for something so he would not drink alcohol that night. The truth was that the budget did not allow him 2 bottles of wine in a restaurant, but he had to give wings to improvisation. So mineral water it is then. And then, after a couple of hours of fun, the moment of truth arrived. The waiter was like a mythical monster with a bill in his hand slowly approaching the table. Poor Obelisk now knew how the soldiers felt in the trenches on the Western Front before the attack. She said something but he was focused on the waiter like a guided missile at a target. And the verdict fell. 720 snippets. Darkness descended on Obelisk's eyes. Darkness enveloped his brain. The room seemed to be narrowing, and would crush him. There were only 750 snippets on him, fortnight worth of salary at the factory. What now? The waiter was expecting a tip, and day by day, long-term plans were in question with Miss Samantha. All 750 left, and it was time for a taxi. The goddess of improvisation did not leave him. He thought of the possibility of a long walk because of the beautiful evening. She looked at him uneasily. Her heels were not provided for 6-kilometer marches, and on the other hand she was still sort of a semi-romantic soul and she agreed. Obelisk almost smiled and pleased to dare to send a kiss. In the cheek, as befits a gentleman from the run-down house behind the cement factory. If the goddess of improvisation was inclined towards the Obelisk, the god of weather was not. He may have had problems with the pantheon of gods, so he decided to vent his anger on ordinary mortals. Oh, yes, it started pouring as if a flood was coming. Obelisk and Samantha tried to take shelter in several places but the wind carried the rain right in their faces. Eventually they found a place and Obelisk noticed that his legs were flooded. The inexpensive Chinese shoe was worthy of its reputation. If this wasn't a date, Obelisk would laugh off this situation as he had done many times before. This time Obelisk had only one way to save his ego from massacre, and that is to part with her immediately so that the noisy slapping of the detached soul could not be heard. He said that the date was phenomenal but that he must take his therapy as soon as possible, otherwise it will be in vain. He muttered a few apologetic phrases and left, leaving Samantha completely disappointed. He knew she understood what the matter was, and he did not expect to see her again. Arriving at the apartment, he noticed the nylon bag with supplies from the store. Tin can of sardines, yesterday's bread, no-name shampoo sold in 1-liter bottles, and a bulb. He was not hungry, and he thought of going to bed after smoking his last cigarette. It was not worth the disappointment anyway. He may not have welcomed the morning in the arms of the half-cute Sammy, but he was waiting for a breakfast feast with sardines. Not ordinary sardines, oh no, but from those with tomato sauce. And then, back to work. I hope you all liked episode 3 of this podcast. Thank you so kindly for listening, and I will be back next time for episode 4 of the How Grotesque podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, sharing, and above all, Subscribe to this channel, dear listener. Because, why not? Join me next time for another grotesque ranting through space and time. Cheerio.
Grand bonhomme bleu avec un petit nez rouge, une paire de gants blancs et un grand col qui bouge, des pieds de géant et de longs cheveux rouges. Bleu, blanc, rouge, c'est moi, beau sur le clown, le cœur sur la main, le rire à pleines dents. La vie est belle, faut la prendre en riant. Quand tout va mal, riez les enfants. Alors venez rire et chanter avec beau sur le clown. Bonjour les enfants, vous allez bien? Vous m'avez reconnu? Vous m'avez reconnu? Je suis votre ami Bozo le clown. Tout en bleu. Les rouges, des gants blancs, qui c'est? Bleu, blanc, rouge, c'est moi, Bozo le clown. Le cœur sur la main, le rire à pleines dents. La vie est belle, faut la prendre en riant. Quand tout va mal, riez les enfants. Alors venez rire et chanter avec Bozo le clown. La vie est belle les enfants. Il faut jamais pleurer. Il faut toujours rire. Alors venez rire et chanter avec Bozo le clown. Un grand bonhomme bleu avec un petit nez rouge, une paire de gants blancs et un grand col qui bouge, des pieds de géant et de longs cheveux rouges.